Right. I know, Alden. Yeah, your sound is not broken. We were just quiet. But welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kelly. I am part of the formation team, and we're really excited to welcome you today for our event, Career Conversations, Navigating the First Month at Your New Job. And this conversation will be led by our formations head of instruction, Daniel Tomko, who you see right here. And the goal is really for you to walk away from this event with tips and insights to really help you succeed at this next stage in your career, whether you're there right now or you're going to be. A lot of Daniel's tips can definitely be applied throughout your career, throughout all types of career changes. So please submit questions in the chat throughout the event. We'll have a live Q&A at the end, about 15 minutes towards the end. And a couple of you did submit questions when you registered. So really excited, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. I'm really excited about this because these are all the things I'm going to talk about today are things that that nobody told me when I started my first software engineering job, or even when I changed jobs. These are things that I had to figure out through trial and error over many years. A little more kind of about me and my background. I went to a computer science school. I went to grad school. I ended up leaving and going to Microsoft. I dropped out of my PhD program and went to Microsoft to move to the Northwest. I spent about 11 years at Microsoft, where I worked on a number of different teams. So not only did I arrive at Microsoft and have to learn how to operate in my first job, but then I changed teams a couple of times from there. And then I started mentoring interns. I became a manager and was mentoring new hires, kind of guiding people through this process. Then ultimately, after about 11 years, I went to Facebook. I was at Facebook for about 8 years. And while I was there, I helped build the Facebook intern program. And so what is an intern program? Well, you have to onboard hundreds to, at Facebook scale, thousands of engineers for a 3-month period. So you have to get them up and running quickly and productive through a project, and then they go back to school. So I've helped, at this point, either directly or indirectly, thousands of engineers through their first months on the job. Here at Formation, I'm working on instruction, helping to train the next generation of engineers, and so of course this is going to be critically important for all of us as we move on to our next job. I'm going to structure this today specifically around entry-level positions. But I'm just going to structure it that way from the perspective of the stories I tell and some of the detail level specifics. But almost everything I'm going to say in this entire talk can apply to anyone that's starting a new job at any stage of the career. And I hope that's mostly obvious. If it's not, please ask me questions at the end, because I'm guessing that most of you are looking for your first software engineering job, or maybe making a first transition. But some of you might be more senior engineers. And I really do believe that everything I'm going to say here should apply to all of you. So hold me to that. All right. So welcome to your new team at your new company, your new role. And if you're new to software engineering, this probably feels like a huge milestone for you. It's probably been 1 to 3 years of work and study and practice to get to this point of successfully interviewing for and being offered the job that you're starting now, right? So it feels like this ending. Especially if you're at the beginning of your career, it really still is only the beginning, right? You don't want to stay a beginner junior engineer. You want to develop skills, you want to build expertise. So this is a milestone for sure, and it is one to be celebrated, but it really is only the beginning. And my sincere hope for all of you is that you're able to create a successful and sustainable career in software engineering. So what we're going to talk about today is the short to medium term goals that you'll need to accomplish in order to set yourself on the best path possible. So at a high level, is your goal to write code? Well, as a software engineer, you will be writing code, but I don't actually think that's the goal, right? Why did the company hire you? Well, why does a company hire anybody? They believe that the company will be able to get more work done and be more successful as an organization with you than they could without you. So the expectation is that you will add something to the company that they didn't have before. And I know that might sound like it's a lot of pressure, but again, we're going to talk about how you actually get there. So we're going to be focusing on what that actually means and what you need to know to get there. We're going to focus on growth of impact. And what I mean by impact isn't lines of code. It's back to what I said earlier, helping the company be more successful, do more with you than they could without you. So you just spent all these years learning all kinds of computer science concepts and techniques. You learned about algorithms. You learn about, from sorting to two-pointer problems to potentially dynamic programming and graph algorithms, all these things that you may have learned through your computer science and software engineering education. You learn about complexity analysis. You learn about coding skills. Is this computer science or is this software engineering? People can just type in the chat, like leave me a note. Are these ideas that you just spent 1 to 3 years learning? Is this software engineering or is this computer science? Okay, first answer is computer science. Next answer is could be both. CS, computer science. Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, we're all on the same page then. Awesome. Okay, so you just spent all this time learning and practicing computer science, but you just got hired to be a software engineer. What's the difference? What's the difference between computer science and software engineering? And I think this difference starts to illuminate what you don't know, and therefore what you're going to have to learn as you approach this new role. So my simple conception of science versus engineering is that engineering is science applied to solve a human problem, right? And this is a job, it's a business. So that problem is in some context that's going to help drive that business forward, right? It's software that the business is going to sell, or it's software that helps the business do whatever it is that it does. And the human problem part of this is always really important, right? Think about civil engineering. If you're going to build a bridge, well, what's the human context there? Well, you're building a bridge for the humans to transit across the river. So you're solving it specifically for humans, and you're solving it in a wider context of wanting to connect one specific human, place that's important to humans on one side of the river to some other place that's important to humans on the other side of the river. So all of this context is really important. Every human problem has context. And for us as software engineers, this means that this is going to turn into applying our computer science knowledge to the practical business applications. So what are some of the contexts that matters in software? And people can, like, again, chat me some notes here. What sorts of context do you think might be important? Scalability, okay, cool. Business rules, yeah. Legal, budget, I love it. Yeah, budget, super important, right? We're gonna build a bridge, we're gonna build a piece of software. It's gotta be done on a time budget, on a cost budget. Product domain, yeah, love it. It's right, we're working with other humans. Usability, yeah, awesome. Security, UX, UI. Okay, you guys are all kinds of great, great answers. I'll give you another one. The context is what's been done before at that business. I mean, most of us, when we join a new company, we're not starting a new project from scratch. We're entering a team with a code base that's already there, and we're starting to contribute to that new source base, right? So part of the context is actually all of the code that's come before, and to some degree, even the code that's no longer there, was written and then replaced, right? Because that code, even though it might be gone, it may have influenced code that's still there, right? So there's a lot of context. And if you're new, it doesn't matter how junior or senior you are. If you're new to a company, what do you not know? You don't know any of this context. You don't know any of this history. And right here, I want to call that out as something that might be a little bit scary, but it's also really empowering. Because guess what? Nobody expects you to have all of that context. When you're walking into a new job at a new company, or sometimes really even a new team within the same company, like I worked on wildly different things in my time at Microsoft. So this absolutely applied. I had zero context walking in the door, or close to zero context walking in the door of these new jobs. So that's scary. There's a lot you don't know. You got hired because you have good computer science skills, and you proved yourself through the interview process that you can write code and you can get things done. But you don't know all of these other things. Scary, but that's empowering, because what that means is you have the freedom to ask questions. And at the end of the day, this talk has one major theme, which is ask lots of questions. And I'm going to get into some more details about, what kinds of questions you should be asking, how to ask questions, how can you ask the best questions that will get you to the point of having enough context to be a good engineer. Okay, so if you're this junior engineer and you're new to the team, there's a few things you need to be thinking about. Obviously, you're thinking about how do you onboard and set yourself up on a great growth path, but you also want to be getting some work done quickly. So there's some short-term goals of just like making some progress, and there's some longer-term goals if you're setting yourself up for a really good growth curve. So your immediate goal is learn context as quickly as possible while not ignoring writing code. I saw one situation a number of years ago with an intern who took the task of learning the context to we'll just say a pretty severe degree, and actually didn't end up writing a whole lot of code that summer. He had to have read every line of code in the product, but he didn't get anything done. So he gathered a lot of context. He could answer all kinds of questions, but the goal at the end wasn't a quiz, a test about like what, answering questions about how the code was structured and what it was. It was to finish a project. So like we have to strike a balance between gathering all of this context and writing code and being as productive as we can as quickly as possible. Okay, so top level, first thing is, because you can't be expected to have all this context, you are free to ask all the questions. Day one, who are you going to be asking? Well, it's probably going to be your manager. Hopefully, not in addition to a manager, you'll have an individual contributor engineer on the team that's also kind of a point person, an onboarding mentor that you can ask questions. So right away, they should be giving you resources. Ask these people questions. One of your early goals is to start to find other people to ask. So obviously, there's the other engineers on your team. Don't discount the PMs. They often are there, it's their job to be loaded with context. And if we're keeping that in mind, remembering that that's the one major thing that we don't have as new people on the team, the PMs are great resources. Designers are fantastic resources. They're people that are super connected to the end users and the precise problems that we're trying to solve. Fantastic resources. If you're at a big company and there's a lot of teams, and find the teams that are adjacent to yours. Seek out people who maybe are the junior engineers or the recent hires on adjacent teams, and talk to them. So don't just ask your manager. Obviously, first day, that's pretty much all you'll have. But very quickly, you want to start reaching out and building your network of people that you can ask. All right. Questions are going to fall into two main areas. Let's talk about the business questions first. Because that's I think we all know why this is going to be important already. So the business questions are not questions that are going to make a huge difference right away, day one on the job. These are questions that you should see these things as an investment in your future impact. One of the goals that you have as a new engineer is to become an independent decision maker. So what do I mean by making decisions? Well, they could be decisions about things like prioritization. Should we build feature A or should we build feature B? Which one is more important? Well, you should have an intuition about what's right. In some companies, making those decisions might be at a manager level, or it might be the responsibility of a PM. But you'll do a better job as an engineer, even in those companies, if you know enough to at least have an opinion, even if it's not on you to decide. You'll have better conversations with the PMs or the decision makers. And often, by showing yourself as capable, you'll end up becoming empowered to be that decision maker. Not only that, if you understand clearly the business context and the prioritization, you can also make really good micro-level engineering decisions just about the code. As an example, how much time do you spend on something? So let's say you're working on adding a feature or you're fixing a bug. There's always many options on how you can approach implementing this change. Some of these might be 5-minute fixes, but have some pros and cons. There may be other options that might take you a few days. Like, understanding the context will help you make a really good engineering decision about how much time you spend on any one thing. And that's a kind of a decision that engineers, even in companies where the PMs or managers might be making prioritization decisions, the amount of engineering effort we spend on something is often an area where engineers have to have a lot of input and often be the ultimate deciders. So the more you understand this, the better, the stronger you have an opinion, the stronger of an opinion you have based on all of this context. It's really, really important. So the first thing you want to know about the business is who the customers are. Who are they? Why do they need your product? Why are they not using a competitor's product? Understanding the differentiation is really, really important. Again, helps you decide, do you build feature A, feature B? Do you fix this bug, or do you add this new feature? Which should we do first? Understanding the customer is absolutely crucial. So those first few weeks on the job, I highly recommend asking a lot of questions about the customers. You may even ask so many questions that you get an opportunity to just go talk to the customers and learn from them directly. And that's a fantastic opportunity. Or participate in user research. It's a great way to learn about what you're building and why you're building that thing. If you're at a really big company and you might be split into divisions. Divisions are made up of teams. You should understand, no matter how big or small your company is, how does your team's work, whatever your team is responsible for, how does that ladder up the chain and contribute ultimately to the company the product or the company's strategy? So you don't need to necessarily know every detail about what every team is doing. You don't necessarily need to know everything about the customers or the product as a whole. But the more you know about directly up the chain from where you are, not necessarily the reporting chain, although that often mirrors the structure of the teams, but knowing really clearly, I'm working on this feature in this part of the project or the product. That's important because it's part of the new user flow, say. And obviously the new user flow is important because if people don't get through that successfully, we don't have customers. Like, there should be a clear story about what your team does and how it contributes to the overall success of the company. All right. Other category of questions. Technical questions. We're engineers, right? We have to learn. We're stepping into this new code base. It's a big one. People may have been working on this project for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. My first job when I started at Microsoft, that code base had actually been started in the 80s. Yes, I'm that old. Also, the code base was well over a decade old at that time. So there was some really interesting crufty code in there. So how do you dive into this and learn more about the code? All right. Well, let's just be honest. Stepping into a new code base like that, it's a really daunting task. The first way you do this is you ask all the questions. You can try searching the code. GitHub has some code searching tools. Some companies like Facebook had an amazing internal code search tool. Really, really powerful. You'll hopefully learn about those things really quickly. They should tell you about those things the first day. However, even if you have access to powerful code search tools like that, you shouldn't spend a lot of time just looking through code like that, typing in random queries and looking for things. That's not a very directed way to ask questions of the code and learn the code base. Why not? Well, it actually goes back to context. Projects have code names. People are bad at naming things. I was in a session earlier today where we were joking around about the name of this classic interview question, the Dutch national flag problem. What does that even mean? That is a terrible name for the problem, right? So guaranteed, especially the first day on the job, you don't even know what to search for. So you need to feel empowered to just start asking questions. And I have a strategy for how to do this. And I'll tell you my strategy, but also I have to warn you a little bit about this. You can't do this without talking to your manager about it first. So what you do is you ask all the questions, and you actually try to get the feedback of you're asking too many questions, slow down. Now, you don't want to do this without talking to your manager first, because you want them to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So why is this a good strategy and a powerful tool? Well, if you don't ask enough questions, if you try and just spend as much time as possible reading code and trying to learn on your own, you're not learning as fast as you could be. So you're really wasting some time. But your manager, your mentor, they're busy people. So even though they have the best intentions for you and want to help you and answer your questions, if you're not asking questions, they probably are going to assume incorrectly that you have what you need. So by asking a lot of questions, you're going to be sure to get what you need. And remember, they can't expect you to know everything. Despite the fact that you spent 3 years studying computer science, there's so much that they can't expect you to know. But even the best managers with the best intentions, if you're not asking questions, they're not going to just check in all the time and give you the answers. So here's what you do. You ask all the questions and you progressively spend more time looking for the answer on your own before. That first couple of days, that first week, you should never spend more than 5 minutes stuck. If you're stuck for more than 5 minutes, find somebody to ask. That's entirely reasonable. And you will ask a lot of questions, but that's okay. You will be gathering context. You'll be learning about tools. You will make progress quickly. The key is then to progressively turn up that knob of how much time do you spend working on finding an answer on your own. The second week, maybe spend 15 to 30 minutes, looking through code, looking through internal documentation, spend more time, right? Because you have a little more context. By the third week, maybe you're spending an hour, right? But you want to turn that knob to spend more and more time on your own progressively, and you want to do that in conjunction with your manager or your mentor. But you want to prep them ahead of time and let them know, like, hey, I'm going to ask a lot of questions and we're going to work through this together and we're going to, get ramped up as quickly as possible. So while you're doing that, you'll be like looking through internal documentation. You probably will even have to ask, where is the internal documentation? Also, side note, if there is internal documentation, it's probably out of date. So anything you read there, take that with a grain of salt, but it's still historical context because it was correct at one point. Code search tools, whether it's GitHub or Git history, like looking through some commits, searching for keywords. Again, finding the right keywords though is sometimes difficult, so ask. Figure out who the contributors are to major features or components or systems. Like find experts, right? So find other people to ask. Also, if you're asking experts, you're staying out of your manager's hair a little bit, right? You're becoming more independent. So that even just that is a good thing, even if you're still asking 10 questions a day. So yeah, you want to get to this point where your manager says, like, yeah, you're asking too many questions. Let's adjust that knob. All right. When you're asking technical questions, it's really, really easy to ask questions in a way that's inefficient. Context is important. So when you ask a question, you've got to be really careful to share some context about what you're doing. Because here's how engineering works. You're given a task, implement a feature, right? And then you sort of make a plan. Okay, I need to do this. I need to do this. I need, an API, and I'll put a button, then I'll make the button call the API, and I'll do something with the response. Like there's all these kinds of steps. Usually at the outset, when you're first starting to think about how to build a feature, the high level approach is normally relatively obvious, especially if you're a junior engineer. They should be giving you things where the initial steps are relatively straightforward. So where are you likely to get stuck while you're working on, building the feature? Well, you're going to get stuck down in the weeds, down in some detail, right? You're going to be looking for, a way to solve a very, very specific problem. The counterexample is then to go and ask a question about that really narrow, specific problem. It's like, hey, I'm working on, I need to find a way to call this thing that's in another part of the code base, but it's not available over here in this component. Like, okay, but why are you doing that, right? Maybe that's not even the right approach. So you always have to give some context. Hey, I'm working on this feature. I'm trying to do it this way. I got to this point and I realized I need to call a function that's not available in this part of the code base. Right now you're giving the person you're asking enough context that they can give you some more accurate direction. And it might be, oh, you're actually started off, going down the wrong path. Wait, I just noticed out of the corner of my eye, Cat, not even a rubber chicken squeaks. You'll have to explain that later. So again, even asking questions, context. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be gathering context and giving context. All right. So we're software engineers. At the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road or the rubber chicken crosses the road, something like that, rubber chickens require. We're going to write code. So you know algorithmic techniques, the craft of writing code. What you don't know is how to be an engineer at a new company. And so I'll tell a little story about myself here. I'd spent 11 years at Microsoft. I had kind of been promoted up through the ranks. And then I left and I went to Facebook, and I walked in the door at Facebook, kind of with a bit of swagger, like, hey, I'm a good engineer. I'm really smart. I know a lot. Facebook has a really high hiring bar. Like, obviously, I made it into Facebook. Like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to do great things. Oh my goodness. There were so many things that I didn't know. In a short sentence, what I didn't know, despite knowing how to do engineering, I didn't know how to do engineering at Facebook. Everything was different. The programming languages were different. I had read a little bit about PHP before I started, so I knew a little bit there. I had never used Git. This was a long time ago. Git was first on Ascendance at that point. So I had been using a completely different source control system at Microsoft. So Git was entirely foreign. The entire tool chain of submitting code for a code review to eventually get merged into master, that entire process was completely different than it had been at Microsoft. So I walked in the door thinking like I was gonna, from the get-go, be able to do some big things. I couldn't do anything. And you should go into a new job kind of with that expectation that you'll need to learn how to be an engineer at the new company. Now, I realize this might be less jarring today than it was for me back then. Why? Well, not that many people were using Git at that point. Lots of people are using either Git or Mercurial now. So that, there's going to be some of these things that are smoothed out. However, I got caught again, because when I left Facebook and I went to another company, they were also using Git. they were using Git entirely differently than what I was used to. And I walked in the first day, I'm like, oh, you're using Git? Great. I know what to do. I have a workflow for this. I'll just start using that. No, I got in trouble. I mean, not like in trouble with my manager or anything, but like I was wrong. I didn't actually know how to be an engineer at the new company. So recognize walking in the door that you will likely need to learn a new workflow and new patterns of how to actually get your code landed. And something I learned at Facebook, I think is really the best way to do this. At Facebook, day one as an engineer, well, day two, day one is HR stuff. Day two is like, now here's your laptop, let's go. Day two at Facebook, your first task that you're assigned is something almost offensively small. Like I almost took it slightly as offense. Like, you want me to just update the color of this? That's a CSS change. It's a one-line CSS change. That was actually my first commit at Facebook, was a one-line CSS change. I'm like, this is not what I came here to do. It was absolutely the right thing. I highly recommend seeking out, if they're not giving you something that's that small and stupid, seek it out for your first commit. Why? Because you're separating out the task of learning the code base and learning the product from learning the workflow, right? They can even tell you, like, go change this word on that line, or like, actually, I've seen other first commits at Facebook where it's like fixing a spelling error in a string in the product. Perfect first commit, because it takes 5 minutes to find that code. You know, like it's a spelling error, like you can grep for that, right? You can find where to make the change trivially. And then the rest of what you're going to do is focused on learning how to push that small change all the way through to production. So your goal isn't to do something big the first day. The goal is to learn the things that you'll need and get that part out of the way so that you can focus on the big things later on. Like I said, Facebook does this really, really well. Every new engineer, doesn't matter how junior or senior you are, you get a silly small bug for your first task. It is one of the simplest but best onboarding strategies I've seen anywhere, and I will take that, you know, wherever I go. Really, really powerful. All right, a couple other things to talk about in code. One of the things that, especially if you haven't worked in in industry before, and you've been writing code for homework assignments or, you know, information sessions, something like that, you've probably developed a personal style of how you write code. Thanks, Kelly. Most companies have coding conventions, which is like basically some style guidelines for how they write code. Debate about coding conventions can be religious, but I'm going to make a strong, potentially controversial statement here. I have never encountered a coding convention that somebody was actually using. I may have not liked it, but I've never encountered one that ultimately was wrong or bad. We could probably invent one, but I haven't actually seen a team using it. Conventions, coding conventions, are culture. The goal is to make the code really easy to work on and really easy to read. The goal is consistency. It's not perfection. You know, back to my job at Microsoft, that team had decided that instead of just enforcing a coding convention, they would let everybody do whatever the hell they wanted. I'm not joking. And you could open up a file and immediately tell by the style of the code who wrote it. Like, oh, that's Simon. Oh, that's Chuck. Oh, that's like you could tell, right? And then how do you go and like implement a feature that might span across files, right? Do you write the new code in your style? Do you merge your style in? Like, it was impossible to read. It was a pain. So you really want to have coding conventions, and you want to adapt as the new employee. You want to adapt to the conventions that are already there. So you have something to be aware of. Some companies have a coding conventions document. You should ask for that day one. But otherwise, try to write your code as though, in a way that fits in. That culture is going to shift over time. In the 8 years I was at Facebook working on what they call the www source base, which is effectively the front end, that source base changed dramatically. The coding conventions, shifted a little bit. The coding patterns changed quite a lot. And so change is okay, especially as new libraries are released. We shifted from, well, not React to React over the time I was at Facebook. So like, obviously the JavaScript code fundamentally changed. Then with it, that came changes in coding conventions. Totally fine. It's expected to change, but that's a deliberate process. And as a new employee, you want to learn this stuff. Okay, one last big topic before we go to Q&A. I want to talk about code reviews. So code reviews, especially when you're new on the team, these things can be scary. You've just spent some amount of time working on this thing. You're going to hand it off to somebody who's been on the team a long time, and they're going to give you feedback. Oh, this could be a weighty thing. It shouldn't be. Here's the thing to remember. Both you and your reviewer have the same goal. You're on the same team. You're trying to get the same things accomplished. And especially as a new employee, you're not going to precisely match the coding conventions. You're not going to know all the coding conventions. You're not going to know all the things in the code that you might know. So your code doesn't have to be perfect. And you should expect good constructive feedback that's coming from a place of wanting you to succeed, right? So it's not criticism. It's helpful context. So you can kind of take a deep breath. The main goal of code reviews is not actually to prevent bugs. That is one thing that code reviews also do. The main goal, though, is sharing knowledge and context. In your first submissions, you will probably learn more than your reviewer, because you're probably doing something small and they're going to give you a lot of feedback about style and all kinds of other things. So you'll learn a lot. Over time, code reviews actually are more about communicating your new idea, your change in the code, out to the rest of the team. Why? Well, because maybe next week you'll be on vacation and something else is going to have to change and somebody's going to have to work in that code. So you're spreading context out, right? You're now generating new code, new features, and other people need to know about it. So the code reviews are a really, really powerful knowledge sharing tool. Okay, some advice about code reviews is that you want to structure your changes for easy review. And there's different patterns and conventions for this. One high-level thing I highly recommend is, even if you're working on a big project, structure it into small commits. Each one articulates a single idea, a single step on the path to implementing the full feature. This makes it much, much easier to review. Do a self-review. Do this in the tools that your reviewer will see. You want to make sure that your code and your comments tells a clear story about what it's accomplishing, how it's accomplishing it, and make it really, really simple. Also, one last thing before we go to Q&A, sorry, Kelly, I know you're like, is that when you get code review feedback, you don't necessarily have to act and accept every piece of feedback. Nick Schrock, a high-level engineer at Facebook for a long time, he wrote this blog post and had this great pithy line in it, which was something to the effect of, the goal of a code review isn't to make the code look as though the reviewer wrote it, right? You're an engineer, you're a smart person, you should be empowered to make decisions about the code. The code reviewer is there to like give you some advice, but use the context that you have, because you're the one working on the project, to constructively push back when you need to. Start reviewing other people's code as soon as possible as well. Again, you were hired because you're smart and you have good ideas. Code reviews are one of the first ways that you can start sharing those ideas with the team at a small scale. And eventually you'll be growing into a senior engineer and sharing much bigger ideas. All right, I'll stop there. Pass it off to Kelly. I'm assuming we probably have a ton of questions because this whole talk was about asking questions.
Yes,
So
no,
you better
I
have
think
some good ones. I'm expecting good ones.
we definitely had a lot of great questions and comments in the chat. And I think that was a great note to end on what you just shared. So I do want to start with one of the questions that was submitted during the registration process. And actually someone asked something very similar in the chat, which was about employer red flags. What are some employer red flags that often could arise during the first month? And what are some things you should be on the lookout for when it comes to, your first month in this new job?
Yeah. I was actually kind of glad this came up ahead of time because I had to think about it. It's a really good question. Fortunately, I don't have a ton of experience with this, right? Let's just like call it out. We're a little bit outside of anything I've had to deal with in a big way, a little bit. My hope is that by asking good questions, again, asking questions, right? It's all about questions. Ask good questions during the interview process, because you can often identify some potential things at that point. Ideally, you don't get into that situation. One of the challenges in that first month, and this is a great thing, by the way, is that I sincerely hope all of you, when you take that job, are excited to be there. You walk in that first day and you're thrilled, right? So we should be honest that it's going to be really difficult in most situations to identify red flags. You're going to feel, or I hope you feel, privileged to be there, right? Like when I got hired at Facebook, I was flattered that I got the job, like that was awesome. So yeah, like you will probably have what they call, rose-colored glasses for some amount of time. And that's going to make it harder to notice. But that said, I don't know, I'll give you some questions that you can ask, ideally in interviews. The best situations are often where there's a variety of levels. You don't want it to be all junior people, and you don't want it to be all super senior people, right? You want a reasonable mix. Similarly, you can ask about that, right? Like, tell me about your team. Like, when at the end of an interview, when people say, like, do you have any questions for me? That's an easy one to ask that they should be able to answer. Similarly, you don't want to be on a team where the median tenure, like length of time on that team, is super low, right? If everybody's new, whoa, especially if you're also a new engineer, like you're new to the field, that's maybe not the best situation for your rapid growth. But similarly, if everyone on the team has been there a really long time, that's also potentially a yellow flag. I won't say a red flag, but it's definitely a bit of a yellow flag. So why is that? Well, if you're on a team for a really long time, sometimes you can actually have too much context. And I actually left the team at Facebook because of this, because I realized that I had been there too long and I knew everything about how that product worked. But what that meant is that we hired a new person at one point, and that guy had so many good ideas that I never would have thought of, because my thinking was all boxed in by all this historical context. Oh, we thought about that before, but we didn't do it because of X, Y, and Z. The context has changed, but now we could. Like, I was still sort of boxed into this sort of old thinking. And I realized that the team could actually go faster if I wasn't there. Not because I wasn't smart or good, but because like I had become, too locked into an old way of thinking. And it's like, oh yeah, we should just get some new blood on the team. So you really want a mix. You want some number of people that are old timers with a ton of context and can answer every question. And you want new people to come in with fresh perspectives. I think that's also something really powerful about, being a junior engineer on a new team and being empowered to ask questions, because you're not expected to know a lot, right? You can ask really good questions that might cause the team to, rethink some things. Like, that fresh perspective is really, really powerful. So you definitely want that. I think those are two things that I always ask about, help me avoid situations where teams might be out of balance.
Thank you, Daniel.
Ask about work-life balance too. Sorry,
Yes,
that's like,
always.
always ask about work-life balance.
Especially in the interview process.
Mhm.
This is a great question from Francis in the chat during the event.
Mhm.
How do you know whether you are underperforming or if people just have unrealistic expectations of you when you are still trying to learn the context of everything in the first couple months?
Ooh, yeah, that's a really good question too.
I
Thanks
know.
for that. So what you want to work towards is consistent output, and over time, growing the impact of that output. Now, it's really hard to answer this question in general because different companies have different expectations. But at a high level, if you're always focused on thinking about some near-term impact, right? That's things like bug fixes. It's small features, right? These are things that you can consistently sort of crank out, right? And so if you look at your personal backlog, there should be, especially as a new employee, definitely as a junior employee, you should see a bunch of things on that backlog that are small units of work that you can get done in 1 to 3 days, right? And you should feel good as a junior engineer if you're consistently pulling things off that backlog and getting them done in 1 to 3 days. The longer you're there and the higher level you get, you're going to want to also be mixing in things that are longer term projects. And those longer term projects are going to break down into these small individual work items also. And the even more senior, like when you're getting up to upper levels of senior to like principal and staff level engineers, some of the things in your backlog might be really, really long lead, enormous things that will break down into medium things that break down into small things. I think of this as sort of a portfolio of work, right? You're making near-term investments that are showing immediate impact. I fixed this bug, and next week the customer doesn't have to deal with that bug anymore. That's impact, right? But you're also making investments towards larger scale, higher impact, potentially a little bit more risky, right? And if you're thinking about something that's a year out, like at a senior principal level, there might be even more risk to that. But if you're making consistent progress and you're also slowly, taking on bigger and bigger projects, then you're probably doing okay. But you also have to, be asking your manager up front about like what the level expectations are. Most companies that are medium size and above have reasonably well-written level descriptions. And having that up front will also then help you look at your, your work history, like what have I done over the last month, and look at your current backlog of like what you're about to do over the next couple of months, and think about like, okay, does this line up with the level description for where I am right now? And that's going to change at different companies. But that's how I'd approach it.
Great. We have 3 minutes left, so this will be our last question. Harvey asked, if you see code that looks either like a code smell or tech debt from a legacy system, how would one go about addressing that to their managers and or leads? What steps should an individual contributor do to highlight that to the team?
Okay, let's be clear about one thing. Tech debt is not bad. I expect every source base, everyone, to have tech debt. And if it doesn't, that team is moving too slow. Because if you attack tech debt every time you see it, what you're doing is you're choosing not to push the product forward, right? If you're addressing tech debt, you're code beautifying, right? But that's at the expense of building a feature or fixing a bug. So there's got to be a balance. So I actually think just the term tech debt tells you something, right? How many people go through adulting with zero debt, right? Most people at some point take out a loan to buy a car, or take out a loan to buy a house, or take out a loan for education, right? All of these things are investments in the future, where you believe that by taking on that debt that you'll have to pay down, you can do something bigger and more important. Tech debt is exactly the same. You can choose to take on some tech debt to like build this feature in a quick hacky way, that might have a little bit of code smell, like whatever. But if that enables you to move past something and get to something more important quickly, that might actually be a good thing. Now, tech debt over time, too much tech debt, the wrong kind of tech debt can slow teams down. So it's not that you don't want to fix these things. It's that when you see them, your first question shouldn't be, how do I get this addressed? It should be, that's interesting. I wonder why it's like that. There's probably a reason. It was probably done that way deliberately. That's actually an opportunity to learn context. And maybe eventually it'll become time to change that code and actually clean that up. But the time isn't always, and actually normally is not, right then and there. Over the course of watching Facebook's code change, there were still in like 2017, there were still some deep, dark, cobwebby corners that used some really old programming paradigms that nobody would write new code at Facebook that looked like that. But you know what? That code was working and it wasn't broken. It wasn't breaking anything else. And because no one had to change that code, it wasn't getting updated. So was it code smell? Yes. Was it tech debt? Yes. Was it a good idea to change it? Not yet. So, it's a great question about tech debt. But definitely think of it as debt. And there's opportunity cost to paying down that debt. And so it's a really important engineering decision.
And it's 6 o'clock.
And it's 6 o'clock.
And we're at time. Daniel, thank you so much. As always, that was such a great presentation, and your answers were so thoughtful. And I think everyone will walk away from this event with a lot of things to think about and put into their own experience and lives. Everyone, thank you so much for coming. We had a really great group that was super active in the chat and had a great number of
Awesome.
attendees. So
I'll have to read through the chat.
Yeah, no,
Stuff
for sure.
I caught out of the corner of my eye was pretty funny. So
yeah. Everyone, thank you so much. We'll send up a follow-up email just with some resources and just any additional answers that Daniel can get to, we'll share with you. And definitely keep an eye out for our next event. We always like hosting these, and we'll see you real soon. Thanks a lot.
See everyone. Thanks for listening.